She walked into the cowboy's cabin, and for one held-breath moment, everything changed. Snow carved the world into white and silence. It fell thick and slow, the kind that writes itself into the shape of things, and then makes them unrecognizable. Nyatti sat by his hearth, with a tin cup between his palms, and the heat of it staining his knuckles. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and old leather, of wool left too long against a body. Outside, the wind made the eaves groan like an animal looking for a way in. Inside, his life had built itself to the size of the room. A bed, a table, a stack of split wood, a lamp that he earned the right to light every evening. He had learned to keep his face, like the land, closed. Years had made him careful with openings. He measured his days by chores. The way a rope frays, the way a kettle whistles, the sound a door makes when it closes too hard. In town, people knew him by the shape he cut against the horizon. A man who kept his back to gossip and his boots to the trail. It was not malice, it was easier that way. The storm found her bent against the wind, a silhouette that was more motion than person at first. She moved like someone who had carried a whole life folded into a bundle. Metal caught the low light when she turned her face to the road. The glint of small discs and wire, the sharp flash of handmade things tucked against her chest. Her hair braided down, her back was flecked white from the snow, and her shoulders were set against the cold like a shield. Nyatti heard the sound before he saw the woman boots cutting through the hush, the soft slap of cloth against gusts. He did not think to call. Havid opened his mouth. "Get into my cabin," he said. The words were a ledger, meant only to keep the storm from carrying a life into the dark. She paused at the threshold, as if negotiating which world to step into. The door dug a thin, perfect line across the wind. For a moment, the storm owned everything, and then she pushed through. If someone had been watching the moment as if it were a film, they might have paused on the small things and not the grand. The door's catch scraped the frame and then let go. A scarf unfurled. A breath that had been held found a new direction. The firelight struck the little metal in her bundle and made it sing, a tiny answering note to the creak of the cabin. Nyatti felt a thing happen inside him, sudden as thaw. A fissure he had not expected, a small loosening of whatever he had tightened into armor. It did not rename his years, it simply shifted the axis he turned on. She set her bundle on the table and hunched near the stove. Her hands worked with care even then. Untangling. Why, smoothing the edges of hammered metal. The jewelry she carried was made from remnants, spoons reshaped into circles, slivers of silver folded into petals, scrap copper braided into rope-themed chains. Each piece had a private economy of patience and repair. He watched her, not with curiosity so much as with the old, blunt respect one gives to work done by hand. They spoke little. The first exchange stayed clipped. "Warm yourself," he offered, because asking someone to stay felt like asking for more than his life could afford. She nodded, and did not ask for more. When she did raise her eyes, there was a caution in them, the way a person tests a new road with the tip of a boot before committing to a step. Outside, the storm kept sending questions to the door. Inside, there was the tin cup, the fire, the clink of wire. The cabin breathed differently, with another body in it. The change was not loud. It came in the way would split a little more willingly under his axe, in the steadying of his hands as he passed her a cup. It came in the small reckoning he had with himself when he found himself setting an extra plate at the table, as if it had always belonged there. If this quiet story is the kind of thing you return to, stay with me. Subscribe for more slow stories of people and the places that make them. They kept their distance in the first days, not out of coldness, but caution. Nights were for mending and for listening. She worked at the table with a lamp, bending wire, filing down edges, until the metal held a new truth. He tended the fire and the horses and fetched water from a spring that tasted of iron and stone. They fell into a routine that was neither intimacy nor distance, but a rhythm that let both of them understand how much room the other required. She called herself Nakomi. When he asked her name, word she gave as if it were an offering, a thing she had been careful with in the marketplace, where she had once set out her work. The market, she would say later in a sentence that, unspooled, like a stitch, had been a place where people measured value, like a scalpel. She showed him, once, the thin hand-tied card, where a line of coins had failed to appear. They looked, but they did not buy, she said. The image of her wares spread on a blanket. The silence stretched tight around her, stayed with Nyatti like a bruise. He remembered the market differently. He remembered how his own gaze had slid away the day he passed her stall. How his feet had taken the easier path. The memory came not as a moral thunderbolt but as a slow, persistent coup, a kind of regret that lives in the ribs. He had learned to watch judgments from a corner, and now the knowledge that he had once looked away lodged in him like a small stone. Daily acts began to do the work that grand gestures never could. He learned the exact way she wrapped wire, so that it would not untwist in a pocket. She learned how he liked his coffee bitter and black in the mornings, with the cup warmed between both hands. She set her finished pieces on a board by the window and arranged them as if the light itself were a buyer. Sometimes she hummed when she worked, a low thread that tied the hours together. He never asked her to stop. Their trust was built of ordinary things. The sharing of a blanket when the storm stubbornly refused to end. The quiet tolerance of peculiar habits. The unremarked decision to leave the door unlatched when the wind softened. There were small tests, as well. Once a neighbor came by to ask if anyone had seen his colt. He stood at the doorway, speaking to the man, his voice sandpapered by years, and felt the town's eyes on the cabin like weather. Nokomi stood in the back with a look that both guarded and invited, and for the first time he felt the precise shape of being a person seen, and the vulnerability of that seeing. Nyatti's shame was not a single moment but a string of choices. He had not told people about the woman he had let pass by in the market. He had not offered his hand when the town whispered. He had preferred the safety of invisibility. That would change, but not by any hero's confession. It changed because a series of small decisions pushed him to the edge of his comfort. Walking into town with her bundled satchel on his arm, leaving his coffee cup on the stoop to show he lived here with someone, letting people see a plate where there had only been his. Winter thawed, and the roads freed themselves. Snow moved into drifts, and then into green shoots. The eaves stopped complaining. One morning the light arrived like a promise. Not loud, but thorough. Nyatti stood by the doorway and watched the road reveal itself. The tracks of others cutting patterns he had not known he missed. "Where will you go?" he asked, as if he had been learning to ask open questions. She looked at him, at the way he was a man of slow decisions and truncated sentences. For a while, she was quiet, as if weighing the weather. Then she said, simply, "Here." That single word was both a declaration and a test. It did not dissolve the past. It made a path through it. It turned an interior shift into a visible choice. When they walked into town together the first day after the thaw, people would not break into immediate applause. The town did what towns do. It looked first. It assigned rumors. It adjusted in its own slow way. Some faces that had once been cool, soft, some stayed cold. A few hands, careful and businesslike, began to place coins on Nokomi's blankets where, before they had only drawn breath. They did not go looking for spectacle. Their return was a series of modest testimonials. A woman buying a brooch for her daughter, a man commissioning a clasp to repair an heirloom. The bar where Nyatti left his boot by the door and sat without flinching. The workshop by the window became a small radio of warm light in an otherwise cautious street. Word moved by the sound of genuine work being done. People could forgive a lot if they found usefulness and steadiness. They could forgive more if they found neither charity nor spectacle in the exchange, only exchange itself. In town, old whispers lingered like the last winter ice. Yet gradually, the town's barometer changed. Coins began to fall onto Nokomi's palm knot. In the way of charity, but of commerce. She learned to bargain and to laugh about trivial infuriation. He learned to listen without measuring his words by the length of his pride. Each small public step was accompanied by a private repair. He would, without fanfare, teach a child to tie a knot, or mend a harness. She would gift a small pendant to an old woman at the post, who had once refused to meet her eyes. Ordinary reciprocity does more to stitch a life than any dramatic apology. The decision to marry was never offered like a rescue. It arrived as a continuation of the choosing. They were by the creek on a morning when the water moved through stones. With a sound, Nyatti said, reminded him of a time when he had been coy about fear. She produced a thin ring of twisted copper. He had, earlier, taken a nail and filed it down until it could circle a finger, without drawing blood. He put the copper ring on her hand as if sealing a bargain neither of them needed to loudly claim. No one shouted. The animals in the distance went about their day. The water kept on naming the ordinary miracle of passing. Their marriage was not a scene of sudden forgiveness, but of persistent belonging. They built a life that made room for work, and for the kind of dignity one gets when one's labor is visible and rewarded. The cabin kept its thresholds. The door opened and closed. The stove burned steady. In the evenings they would sit with the lamp near the window and watch the town shift. A slow unpeeling of skepticism that made room for acceptance. When people asked how it had happened so quickly, how a single entrance could break a man's shell, and Alta, the map of a small town Nyatti, would only shrug and look at the kettle. He knew the truth. The moment at the threshold was a beginning, sudden in feeling, but not in consequence. It had been the crack that let light into a place that had forgotten there was more than one way to keep warm. Nokomi kept making jewelry. Her hands told stories of the world, the way a bent spoon could become a clasp, the way a jagged scrap might take a new contour and become desired. She displayed her pieces on a board by the window where the light could find them and where anyone could look and choose or not. To be seen, she had discovered, was a craft as much as anything else. It required steadiness and the willingness to be countable, to allow your worth to be measured in the very public, very ordinary currency of exchange. Years later, the narrator would look back and draw the line from the night the storm met the road to the summer when a child chased a hoop by the creek, and did not think much of any of it. What remained true was the smallness of the steps, and the steadiness of choice. Dignity, as the story went, is not something given. It is built nail by nail, ring by ring, cup by cup, by people who decide to stand visible, and to let themselves be known. If this story moved you, share it with someone who likes quiet beginnings and the slow work of belonging. The closing image returns to the weather that began it. Not a storm now, but the long, forgiving light after rain. The cabin door stands open against a field of grass. The hearth is a steady blot of warmth, visible through the glass. The metal on the table catches the sun and does not pretend to be other than what it is. Small pieces of care, hammered and filed, offered 4 hands to choose. Nyatti watches the road beyond the porch as a man who knows the cost of looking away. Nokomi sits by the window, fingers nimble around a new clasp, her face a map of the labor that made her visible. The world has not been repaired in a single night. It has been altered by a series of choices, some instant, most slow, that added up to a life. If you ever stand at a door in the dark, wondering whether to knock or to keep walking, remember the sound a threshold makes when it opens. Remember that an instant can crack open a life, and that choosing to stay in the light is itself a kind of miracle, quiet, without fireworks, but true.